It's after midnight on a side street in the small town of Ellsworth, Maine. There's a little building with a light showing through the garage door. The sign outside says D&D Elvers.
Hi, how are you?
Hey, good. How are you?
Good.
I'm Matt.
Dustin Young.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Good. How are you?
D&D stands for Darrell and Dustin Young. They're a father and son duo who run this business dealing in baby eels, which are also known as Elvers. Darrell is also the co-director of the Elver Fishermen's Association.
And founder. Been eeling 25 years now.
Darrell's a stocky, friendly guy in his 50s who, as you can hear, speaks with a thick Down East accent. He shows me these big blue tanks where they hold the Elvers they have bought from fishermen.
It's 250 gallons of water in here. Yeah, so you can see all the eels down the bottom there, see?
Oh, yeah. Oh, okay. I can see them now.
Yeah.
The Elvers themselves are tiny, just a couple of inches long. They're transparent. You can see their two tiny black eyes and their tiny spine through their skin. For this reason, at this stage in their development, they're called glass eels. And the way they're swimming in the tank, flicking their tails back and forth...
They look like enormous sperm.
Yeah. Right.
Under a microscope.
Right.
Only 2 states allow fishermen to catch Elvers, Maine and South Carolina. And the prices can be astronomical. Tonight, it's $2,500 per pound. The Elvers are so valuable because there's a huge demand for them. The eels Darrell buys will soon be on a flight to Asia, where they'll be raised up in aquaculture operations. Other eel populations in Asia and Europe have collapsed because of overfishing. So the US and Canada are the major source of eels in the world. And Maine produces by far the most eels in the United States. Each one of these tiny eels will eventually grow to be 3 to 5 feet long and upwards of 15 pounds. That's what ends up on your plate when you order eel at a Japanese restaurant. Darrell himself isn't really a fan.
You're going to like fish. It's kind of like call it trout. It's a freshwater fish is what it tastes like. Kind of blah tasting. You need a little spice on it.
Over the course of the night I visit, Darrell buys 63 pounds of eels, $157,000 worth. The Elver fishery is tightly regulated, with strict caps on the amount each fisherman can catch. But with prices so high, some have been tempted to cheat. A federal sting called Operation Broken Glass caught about 20 poachers over the past several years. One of them was Bill Sheldon. He's kind of a legend among Elver fishers in Maine.
He's the grandfather of this fishery. He taught us all how to fish.
Sheldon got caught buying eels from undercover agents and unlicensed fishermen who were catching eels in states where it's illegal.
But he thought he was God, I guess, and wanted to poach up and down the coast and got everybody fishing for him. And the money was phenomenal, and he got in trouble.
Sheldon pleaded guilty to the charges, and a court sentenced him to 6 months in prison. A few years ago, the state of Maine put in a new system that's designed to make the kind of poaching Bill Sheldon did harder to pull off. Each fisherman has a set quota, a total weight of Elvers he or she is allowed to catch. The state tracks each fisherman's quota electronically. Since 2014, the Maine Department of Marine Resources says this new system has cut Elver violations by 92%.
We have to get going because I gotta go check.
Oh, yeah. All right. Yeah, sure. Let's go.
It's nearly 3 a.m. That means it's low tide. Time for Darrell to check his nets out in the river. Eels lead pretty mysterious lives. You know how salmon live in the ocean most of their lives, but swim upstream to spawn? Eels live for most of their lives, and it can be for decades, in rivers and lakes. Then they swim out to the ocean to spawn, to the Sargasso Sea, which is this huge, calm area in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Once the baby eels hatch, the tiny larvae leave the Sargasso Sea and float on ocean currents back to rivers and streams all along the coast of North and South America. They gather at the mouths of rivers and brooks in early spring, waiting for the temperature to be just right.
Fresh water has to be warmer than the ocean water.
Okay.
And if it's not, the eels will just come in with the ocean water and just mill in front of the brooks and try to get acclimated to the fresh water. And then when the fresh water finally warms up, warmer than the ocean water, they want to dive right in it.
We get to the place on the river where Darrell has set his net and get out of the car. Darrell waits while I try to figure out how to put on my waders. Then we set off across the wet grass towards the brook. Darrell has what's called a fyke net. It's a big net that stretches across part of the river, and at low tide, the top of the net is up above our heads. The net funnels baby eels into a small tube called the cod end. Darrell unties a rope that keeps the cod end in place and empties the contents into a bucket.
See the eels?
Oh, wow, yeah. It's full of eels. How is that for catch?
It was a small catch, probably.
Yeah.
It was early.
We head back to the car. Darrell dumps the bucket of eels into a cooler with a pump that keeps water circulating.
Not as good as last night.
Ellsworth is a small town, but the area around it is very sparsely populated. As we drive through the dark, houses are far between, set way back in the woods. The kind of blue-collar jobs that used to exist around here, quarrying granite, or felling trees, or working in a paper mill, have vanished. To hear Darrell describe it, there just aren't that many jobs here anymore besides eeling.
But it's really helped this economy out around here because people went out and bought new vehicles. I mean, everything. Carpenters, build stuff. I mean, this place got booming when all that money splurged. It was $40 million.
$40 million
$40 million in glass eels.
Wow.
And this economy around here, it spiked it.
Like all Elver fishermen, Darrell is secretive about how many pounds of eels he's allowed to take in a year. He doesn't seem particularly fancy. He drives an old Subaru, but the Elver business has been good to Darrell. He was able to finish his house, and he built a house for his son. Darrell thinks Dustin might have moved away to find work if it weren't for the Elver business.
So you get to have your son around.
So we get to have the sun around, and it's been quite a pleasure, I'll say that.
It's pretty amazing that a guy who grew up without electricity in rural Maine could make a small fortune catching these tiny eels. Eels that have traveled all the way from the Sargasso Sea to a brook in Maine, only to be caught in a net and flown in a plane across the Pacific to Asia, where they'll live out their eel lives until they end up on a sushi plate in Tokyo or Vancouver or maybe down the street from you. The Briny is produced by me, Matt Frassica. You can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you have a minute, leave us a review. It helps other people find the show. And thanks for listening.